With thy spirit.
Let's pray. Oh, sorry. Merciful God, we have in the light of your truth and finally attained to the light of everlasting life through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. It's called Revelation. This is a very easy to read commentary. It was, I believe, published in the 1980s. You could argue that it is unstained. This is from Northwestern Publishing. I believe you can get it. You search for it on Amazon. You can search for it wherever. But Northwestern Publishing is Wisconsin Synod professor. By the picture, numerous commentaries. The most recent one by a very loved pastor and professor in the Lutheran. Okay.
He was here. He did a series here.
Yeah, and he's a good guy. Good professor. I knew a lot of people. No. The one that's from the most recent commentary published. I like going through it, and I'll read. You read the text, and then you read what he has to say. And every time I've looked at it, I'm like, what? That he would come to, they just don't. To me, they don't fit a simple reading of the Triumph Song. Siegbert Becker. Yep, and I can spell that for you. His name is spelled Siegbert W. Becker. It was out of print, and then suddenly it was in print. And that matters. So you've got to, it's like a year later, they started publishing it again, so it might look, if you read it, you're like, yeah, that makes sense. You end up going back to, it's just a beautifully written book. So eventually, if you want to know, read this book. Okay. We are Matthew 24. Got this open. Here we go. I went over this in my sermon, Abomination of Desolation, okay? So let's look at this. Standing in the holy place, let the reader understand, in his house, and let the one who is in the field not turn back to take his cloak. And alas, for women who are pregnant and for those who are nursing infants in those days, pray that your flight has not been from the beginning of the world until now, no, and never will be. And if those days had not been cut short, no human being would be saved, or there he is, do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will arise and perform great signs and wonders. So look, he is in the wilderness. Do not go out. If they say, looking of the Son of Man, wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather. Okay. Now tonight we heard, so we are back at my sermon 2 weeks ago. We're going to talk about it again. And I didn't do that. If I had done that, the sermon would have been as long as last week's, if not longer service. It's not supposed to be like that, Okay, let's talk about the abomination of desolation. We see from the book of Daniel that there would be an abomination that causes desolation, spoken of by the prophet Daniel. It's right in, and this is why sometimes when you're looking at these things, everybody wants to say, well, this is what it has to be. Well, actually, a lot of times when you're dealing with these things, it's actually, there's layers of belief and layers of meaning that are actually, that there's this man by the name, he was a Seleucid king of Antioch, after him, Antiochus, okay? It's Epiphanes founded, okay? So Epiphanes means a revelation of the divine, okay? Or a manifestation. He put this little thing on the end, Epiphanes. Well, in other words, what he's saying about himself is that he, Antiochus, is a manifestation of God. And we'll even see this with men who rise to power, okay? The emperor cult of Rome had a similar problem of the first century, and I think it was Domitian. Could have been Diocletian. I always mix them up. And then the other one is towards the beginning of like the fourth, the one that John faced, was that he wanted to be known as Lord and God. Right? Well, at this point, worshiping Jesus. And the main contention of the apostles is that Jesus is what? That he is Lord and God. Epiphanies, or reveals his divinity. That's why we have to claim the title of divine and be worshipped as divine. Alexander the Great, before any of them, before she was the last of the Ptolemies, Ptolemy and Seleucid, they were descendants of two of the four Greek generals that had followed Alexander the Great. Okay? And wherever he went, guess what he named the city? There was Alexandrias everywhere. And he named them all these cities after himself. And he went down to Egypt, and the Egyptians, guess what they did? God. And that's how, imagine this is maniacal. Now there's these revisionist historians today that want to claim that Alexander was gay, okay? That he struggled with, or didn't struggle with homosexuality. It's not true, okay? Nonsense, okay? They worshipped him like a god. And he was a pagan, obviously. You'd go and win a victory. What do you do after the battle?
Celebrate.
You celebrate.
For months.
Okay? And how do you celebrate is what happened to him. And he drank himself to death. So much for him being Lord and God. Well, the four generals divided his empire up between them. Antiochus Epiphanes, years before the birth of Christ, he's up in Syria. Okay, that's where he's at. Was superior to everybody else's. Okay? He being the manifest, the Egyptians, the Ptolemies. Well, the Romans got in the way. Okay, the Romans had not yet taken over Egypt. Rome, and most of the cities and most of the places around Antiochus and the Syrians, the Seleucids come down there and they conquer the Ptolemies. That means they're going to, they basically said, you will not step any farther. And he backed off. But he ended up getting the Egyptians and the Syrians. The battles took place. Guess where most of the battles took place? In the Holy Land. Because that's through. He takes over. He takes over and he's like, okay, I'm the one in charge here now. I think the Ptolemyant on the local population, which the local population was made up of. No, not yet. Romans didn't really come. The Jews. The Jewish people had returned from exile, before. They were in Babylon for about 80 years, and they had gone rule of the Persians. Well, Alexander was the one who came through and conquered the Persian Empire. And so where the Holy Land is today, well, he comes down, takes over, and he does not, no, I'm Greek. And he went and he put a statue of Zeus in the Holy of Holies, and they sacrificed pigs on it. Okay? Well, it's ritually unclean, and Jews did this statue of Zeus, and he sacrifices pigs to it. Well, Zeus is the head of the Greek pantheon, who corresponds to Baal. So this really upsets the Jews because they worship Yahweh. The Apocrypha. And Concordia Publishing House has produced an English translation of the Apocrypha that you can purchase. Okay, so it is available. The Concordia Publishing House one has some commentaries and Lutheran preface. The abomination that causes desolation is this moment, is when Antiochus Epiphanes, a madman, says, let the reader understand, because the people who are hearing Jesus and all You guys don't. Which is why I have to inform the readers so that you do understand. Are no longer, they got their independence. They got their independence. They won their little civil war. And they were free for a little bit. He ended up getting steamrolled. Who steamrolled him? Take a guess.
The Romans.
The Romans. The Romans steamrolled him, completely take over Egypt, and they make it their own. Because they want who's on the throne?
Alex.
Who's on the throne?
Still Alex?
Nope, Alexander's dead, long time ago. He's Greek. The emperor is on the throne. It's not Augustus at this point. He was the one who wanted to tax everybody. He's the one that sent Mary and Jesus is talking here. I believe it is Tiberius at this point. Baloney. Okay. They knew it was baloney. They all knew they weren't gods. They knew that they weren't. But, you're the emperor, so helps with tax collecting. So let's make some temples to me, and I'll allow it. He believed in his own hype. Caligula. Yeah, he was the first Epstein. Grandsons and of the family of Tiberius, which is, he for as far as Roman emperors going, Tiberius wasn't bad. Claudius was the one that nobody took seriously in his speech impediment, but he was actually the one who was the smartest of them all. And he was actually where you would have emperors come along who were a little cuckoo, nuts. And they would take this emperor cult stuff, the Romans are pretty decent, as far as rulers in the ancient world, you could argue. They're like, okay, you guys, as long as you pay your taxes, we'll let you keep your temple, and paid your taxes. Caesar pretty much leave you alone. Okay? Now, a lot of people were slaves. But even back then, being a slave in a Roman rich person's house was probably better than most people had to deal with. But the taxes were, you could argue, were oppressive. They always are. Okay? The Jews, if you read the Gospels, you're there. The Jews are cantankerous. They are. They trap Pontius Pilate. He's trying to let Jesus go. They won't let him. They're manipulative. And so they forced Pontius Pilate to kill Jesus. He doesn't want to do it. They were constantly rebelling. All this talk about Messiah figures. Just accept Roman rule. And they wouldn't accept it. And they thought that just like what happened with Antiochus Epiphanes and Hanukkah would happen again. Well, the Messiah shows up, and here he is, he's talking. And he's talking about the abomination that causes desolation, and everybody's like, yeah, we remember that, okay? But what Jesus explains here is, guess what? This isn't going to work out. Back then, Antiochus Epiphanes, he left, and they got their freedom. There isn't going to be a happy ending. And that's what's being described here. So this is why he's like, let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. So you see it coming. Well, what's coming? Right here. Now I'm going to get some of these things. Let's go to the settings. Cross references. Notes. Vultures will gather. So there's a little AV. So we're going to go down here. AV. Yeah, that didn't tell us anything. All right. That's not going to give us any info. Cross-references, footnotes, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Now I'm going to V next to vultures. If you have a non, you've got one of these, and I'm just going to give you the info. I can't find it. $29.
Where there's a dead body, there the vultures will.
What verse is that? 28? Okay. my NASB. The vultures is not necessarily the way that this is supposed to be translated. We think vulture, what do we think? Where the vultures will gather. Okay, because vultures eat corpses. So in English, we know that. We see it on National Geographic and all that, and the nasty, bone-eating vultures and all that. The whole carcass will be gone. There's 2 species of vultures in Africa, and there's nothing left once those guys get to the party. There's another bird that is commonly associated with eating dead things. Do you guys know what that other bird is? Eagles.
Yep.
Eagles eat dead things. What?
Benjamin Franklin did not want them to be our national bird. He wanted the turkey.
He wanted the turkey. Right?
Turkeys are smart.
And all of a sudden you'll hear that beautiful, that cry, that okay, that, right? That's not what they sound like. That's actually the cry of a red-tailed hawk. Eagles have look it up. I'm not going to do it now, but bald eagle sound, look it up. And it's this high-pitched, and it's just like, what? Yeah, it's a chattery, high-pitched sound. But they eat dead things. They do. Eagles eat dead things. They're carrion eaters. They're not as majestic. Who does the killing, though? Other animals, like let's say like the red-tailed hawk. Red-tailed hawk, they're awesome. You watch them, they're along the interstates, they're along some of the country highways, they're all over the place. We had one in our backyard living this past summer. They're awesome birds, peregrine falcon, what?
Sometimes they drown when they're fishing.
Yeah, so, but eagles eat dead stuff. That's what that's what they're known for most of the time, which is why at fishing boats, that fish because they don't want to, it's a lot easier to get a hand out than it is to, to have to do the work yourself. But this is what this is about. This isn't vultures here. It's just where the corpse is, there the eagles will gather. Okay? So we have level Jupiter and a temple of Jupiter built on the Temple Mount. The Emperor Hadrian, who built Hadrian's Wall up in Great Britain to keep the crazy Scotsmen from coming down into Great Britain, okay, because the Celts and the Picts, okay, and so they built a wall. Hadrian built that wall. Well, Hadrian was the one that built a temple to Jupiter, which is the same guy as Zeus, on the Temple Mount after Jerusalem was destroyed. Well, that's not what Jesus is talking about, even though that is going to happen. Similar to what Antiochus Epiphanes did. Bible. What week is it? What week is it? What?
The last week of the church.
Not this week. We're close. This is the last week of Jesus' life. When he says this, suffer, and I'm going to die. And now he's talking about a corpse. And he's talking about eagles. Well, the symbol of Rome was the Roman legion, and the symbol of the Roman legion was the standard that they carried. And on the top of the standard, and there would be various symbols and the like, and it would probably hold an eagle like this, outstretched. The eagle is the Romans. That's who it is. What is be crucified. That's the worst thing that you could experience is crucifixion. I think that's probably right up there. Some people might really have imaginations, could come up with something worse. Okay, humanity could crucify God. And he's right there with them. And they crucify him. And so who's there? Jesus is the corpse. And the eagles have gathered around him, and it is from the unscrupulousness and the injustice of the Jews. Okay? That's the abominable thing. I think the abomination that causes desolation is the crucifixion of the Son of God, but also the continued action of the Roman legion being the very agent of the destruction of Jerusalem and of the people was this is what Jesus is telling them what's going to happen. Okay? When you see the abomination that causes desolation, let the one on the housetop not go and take what is in his house. Because back then, you're on top of your house. That's the deck. That's your patio. You didn't have a deck on the back. You didn't have a patio on the front. You went and spent your time, in the evenings up on your roof. Okay? So if you're up there and you see him coming, don't go into your house. Don't go down into your house. And if you see him coming, flee to the mountains. Okay? And let the one who is in the field not turn back and take his cloak. Okay? You see him coming, don't run over to the side. You're working. It's hot out. You've girded your loins up for work. No, don't run over there and get your coat. No, you better hightail it off and get going. Okay? And alas, for women who are pregnant and those who are nursing infants in the days. What's the why? Because if you're lucky, and husband might have a horse or a donkey or maybe a wagon, but probably not. So it's gonna be hard. Or you've got the Sabbath.
I don't get that.
The Sabbath part, well, because you're not supposed to go and work. It's the day of peace. So if they show up on the Sabbath, well, guess what? You're in bad shape. Saving your skin. But what's the problem with winter? Pray that it's not winter. Yeah, because it's going to be cold. It's going to be awful. For then there will be great tribulation, such as has not been since the beginning of the world until now. And he's given them a warning. Where the corpse is, there the vultures will gather. Okay, because the corpse is not only Jesus, because they killed him. When they kill the Son of God, what does that mean for the Jews? And he knows what's coming. He knows that the judgment is going to come upon them, and he knows that it is going to be by God. They didn't flee. They fled from the mountains, and they fled from all these places, and they went to the city. They went to Jerusalem. The hillsides and the country emptied, and they went into the city, and the population of Jerusalem swelled from, I think it's either 1 million or 2 million people. Okay? They start arguing, and they start burning each other's food stores. The whole city had divided into 4 groups. Start burning each other's food. What's that mean? Yeah, you're going to starve a lot around and just wait them out. Eventually the Romans broke in because the people are dying off because they're starving.
So all of this is happening after Christ?
This happens after 3 BC, actually.
Mm-hmm.
So he's born in 3 BC because the calculation probably wasn't exactly right. So about 30 AD, and then 40 years later is when. Yep.
Is that the same time frame, or is that happened? Is that the forefront of what happened before the city burned?
No, you've got Jesus is crucified.
Right.
And then 70 AD, the Jews rebel in, I think, 60. The Jews are scattered. They kill. Unbelievable. You could argue that Babylonians, Book of Esther deals with an attempted Holocaust of the Jews. That's what the Book of Esther is about. There's all that intrigue that's happening in Esther. Esther goes, but if Esther doesn't intervene, then she's going to have to be killed along with the rest of the Jews. So that ends up happening, and because they were just sick of it, because it just had gone on and are committing the abomination. You got Jesus, who his death is an abomination to God, and the very thing that the ones who brought about that abomination, the Romans, their legion, the eagles are coming. They're coming to, they destroy Jerusalem, wipe it out. As Jesus told the disciples, no, see, all this is going to be destroyed. That's what we looked at last week. But that's straightforward about it. He wrote a book called On the Jews and Their Lies. He was viewed as being an anti-Semite. Luther believed that the gospel was rediscovered and that there were Jewish ghettos and Jews would be converted. And so the Jews hear the gospel once again, and what do?
Deny it.
They reject it again, and so Luther is pretty upset. Luther also has a worldview that is one of Christendom, where the kingdom of this earth, the kingdoms and the princes and the electors and all of them, avert the Christian king and to not follow the rule of the king is to be a traitor and to do things that are subversive to society. In Western Christian churches, in the Western, because of the teachings of Jesus, in the Western countries, rulers are the same as they are today. If you're looking to finance a war, what's the best way to get some money to go and kill your enemy?
Add more taxes?
No, that's harder actually. Not rebel, you got to make it worth their while. So what do you got to do? You got to pay them. You got to pay the soldiers, and you also have to give them some kind of thing. But you've got to finance an army. Well, what's the nature of finance? Come on, what do you got to do? You want to do something in your life today, what do you got to do?
Get the money.
You got to go borrow it.
Borrow it.
You got to go borrow it. And you got to do not supposed to lend it out with interest. So in other words, the king, who is Jesus, says, no banking. No collection. Could be bankers. The Jews, okay? The Jews could be bankers. Now this is stuff, again, for me to be saying these things, I'm just being anti-Semitic. But it's true. Okay, it is true. And so, you got a king, he wants to finance a war, he wants to finance some things. I can't get the money from the Christians. Well, we've got some people over here who don't follow what Jesus taught. Problem was, according to the Jews, they could not lend out money to collect interest. Well, over the course of a couple of generations, over a couple of 30, 40, 50 years of this thing and all of this thing, what happens?
They get wealthy.
They get wealthy and they end up owning almost everything. And the king and the crown is in debt to the Jews. Jesus, and who is doing this thing that's, well, you might not have been the king when all this started. You might be the son.
Mm-hmm.
And so you inherit this mess, and you are going to run them all off. That happened throughout Europe over and over and over again. That is the history. Okay? They had there was fighting about whether or not you would have a bank. And there was those who said no national bank. And there was those who said, yeah, we got to have a national elite. They wanted a bank. Okay? Hamilton was all about having a bank. He was against the second bank and got rid of the second bank. Andrew Jackson was right on that $20 bill. Okay? He banks typically
Rich people.
have a centralized bank all the way up until during what was called the Gilded Age in America. Post-World War, post-Civil War, all the way up till World War I. And it was called the Gilded Age. And if something is gilded, that means there's
Plenty.
there. Now we have a populist again. What's this populist? What do they hope this populist will do? Get rid of the big bank. Wipe it out. Okay? It could happen. Exactly. Okay? Yeah. Okay. But to speak this way is to be accused of being an anti-Semite. Me and the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod that we operate a bank and a credit union, and we lend out money to interest to our own churches and to our pastor. That was then. This is now. We don't have to follow what Jesus said. It's like, what are you guys doing? Okay. And what did we just read tonight? Supposed to be doing and getting drunk and doing all this. Well, yeah. So, yeah, we better get ready. Okay, read verse 29 to 31, and then we will, this is kind of where we are. Immediately after the tribulation. Now, what Jesus is talking about here is the tribulation is what happened in Jerusalem. That's the trick. Back to the when is the end of the world? When is the end of the world?
Never Jesus comes back.
When is the end of the world? The end of the world began when he said it is finished. What happens? Sign and sun and moon and stars, right? He talks about how in the lesson you heard tonight, guess what that means? No sun, no moon, there's going to be an earthquake, there's no stars, all of this. Okay, this is like, and it may be that it was a sign in the sun and moon and stars, because the sun and the moon are not there any longer. Really weird, okay? And then there's an earthquake. All of these things are happening. The judgment, we always associate the judgment with the end of the world. Well, what happens at Jesus' death? The judgment. Temple Mount is split, meaning God doesn't need that anymore. All has been fulfilled. So the end of the world began when this has taken place. Well, guess what? It happened. The sign in the sun and moon and stars, the God dies, the judgment. And then he says, still not over. When they tell you, you look at history, what happens? It's not getting any better. In fact, it's getting worse. The Cuban Missile Crisis, how awful that was. And being in the 1980s and having, Reagan and Gorbachev and, thousands upon thousands. Okay? Nonsense. And that's what they taught kids back in the 50s, 60s. Soviets picking a fight with somebody, and now we're right back, and it's worse than it was at the Cuban Missile Crisis. And we are people right now. This is insane.
If it happens, it happens. If it don't, it doesn't.
Well, that's what my wife said. But it's
Don't
like,
worry about what's gonna
what's
be
wrong
like
with people?
now.
What's wrong with people? But that may not even be the end. May not be. I don't think that this, and part of it is I don't think that's why you've got some smart people saying, they're going to, and I hope we get there, because we need to give peace a chance. No, not next week. 2 weeks. Write this down. We're going to start at 29, wherever that's at. We're going to start at 29, 2 weeks from today. Next week we would have on Sunday lots of Thanksgiving hymns. Then we'll all go home. We won't have Bible study after that. And enjoy your Turkey Day. And listen to all the... Occasionally somebody will actually say, I'm thankful for Jesus Christ. And I'm thankful he is focusing this correctly.
Acknowledging.
What?
Acknowledging.
Yeah, finally acknowledging Jesus. And then we will, this coming weekend is the parable of the 5 wise and 5 foolish virgins. So it's beautiful. Prayer. Lord God, bless you with saving faith.